This is Scott Richmond
and Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 1015 FM. Arnie, good morning to you. How are you today?
I'm doing really good, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm great.
We have a very interesting show today. I hope that you're prepared to handle it. I don't know if I am. We have 3 women entrepreneurs coming in to talk about their careers and what's going on in the world of entrepreneurship in Montana and even globally as it affects women. And
perfect.
And women entrepreneurs in general are more ambitious and successful than their male counterparts. So I'm not sure that we're prepared to handle what we're up against today.
Oh my God, yes.
And in general, entrepreneurship is a completely misused word. It's a concept that actually sounds a lot cooler because it's French, I think.
Right.
I mean, if you're in the business world, would you rather be called a businessman or woman or an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But
businessman.
Right. You want to be called an entrepreneur, but and it's a misused word because everybody considers themselves an entrepreneur or wants to be considered an entrepreneur. But there's a huge difference between just running a business and taking on the characteristics of being a successful entrepreneur. So, for example, a businesswoman, we'll get prepared for our guest today by using the female tense.
Yeah.
A businesswoman walks sort of a defined path, in what they do. And an entrepreneur makes their own path, makes her own path.
Sure.
That's kind of a difference. A traditional businesswoman, gets involved in a business that's in high demand, that's geared towards profits. And an entrepreneur gets involved with a unique idea and they want to bring something new to market. And we're going to hear today about Mama Load and some other things that fit that bill very, very well.
Very successful Missoula company.
Right. A businesswoman wants to make a place in an existing market. And an entrepreneur wants to create their own market.
Sure.
And a business person usually gets more involved in things that are conventional as opposed to an entrepreneur who really is involved in the unconventional.
Right.
And because we wanted to talk about entrepreneurship, we brought in today 3 very unconventional women to talk about what they know and to tell us what we should know about the world of entrepreneurship here in Montana.
I love it. And I know 2 of the 3 gals that we're bringing in, because we're bringing in Copple with Hilltop Solutions, Elke Govertsen with Mama Load, and Holly Truit. So I know Elke and Caitlin. Tell me a little bit about Holly before she gets in.
Well, Holly works at the University of Montana. She runs Spectrum, which is the University of Montana-based hands-on public science center.
Okay.
She's moved downtown. She's also the co-principal investigator in the Big Sky Brain Project, which I'm very interested to learn about. And she comes very highly recommended to us, and so I'm excited to have all 3 of them on the show to talk to us because, as you and I know, we may not say that in front of them, but our audience we can share it with.
Sure.
Women are better entrepreneurs than men, and women are better calculated risk takers than men, and women who have entered the world of entrepreneurism as opposed to just traditional business have been very successful. There's 126 million women operating new businesses around the world now.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty staggering. In some countries, it's the predominant growth area in the business world is among women. There's also 98 million women at the helm of existing companies. And that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, and we shouldn't downplay it. But it really only makes up a small percentage. And I thought one of the most interesting statistics here in the United States, where we sort of tout as a role model for the rest of the world, U.S. women own 30% of the businesses in the United States, which is, not where it should be, but it's better than many other places. But they only employ 6% of the workers and only have 4% of the profits.
Why is that?
Well, because they're very small businesses,
right.
And they're very niche businesses. And they're not taking over the major corporations. I mean, we can name the 6 or 7 women who are running major corporations in America, and then there's thousands of corporations that are run by men. But I think the growth area and what we're going to ask our guest today about is in the area of entrepreneurship, the starting up of the new businesses that are making their own path, that are bringing unique products and services to market, that are unconventional. And, Elke, Caitlin, and Holly certainly are unconventional women in the traditional sense of things, and we're going to be very excited to talk with them today about what they know.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Arnie. On What Do You Know? We're going to be welcoming Caitlin, Elke, and Holly after this break on What Do You Know? All right, we're back in the studio with What Do You Know? Let's have our three guests introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Elke Govertsen with Mama.Load magazine.
And I'm Caitlin Copple, former city councilwoman here in Missoula, and I'm a public affairs and communications consultant.
And I'm Holly Truit, and I'm with the University of Montana. I have the pleasure of directing the Spectrum Discovery Area as well as the broader Impacts Group.
So what I know about all these women, Scott, is that they have a tremendous talent for multitasking and have their fingers in a lot of pies. So what would be your message to our listeners today about the pies that you all have your fingers in? Elke, what do you want to share with them today?
Something that they should
know
take
about.
Away, or
yeah, something that should
be
be
for me.
Come on, Elke.
From your perspective. The other ones will talk for themselves. You tell what are you up to these days?
And speaking to the mic.
So I have Mama.Load, which is going crazy. I've got a couple kids, which are also always going crazy. We also have a side business called The Main Thing Is, which does custom publishing work. I'm on a few boards. I keep mighty busy just with life.
So you started Mama.Load in 2009, and all of a sudden, bam, it becomes viewed as America's best parenting magazine. How did that come about?
Well, Mama.Load started as a free local print magazine in 2009, which is like the worst business model at the worst time ever.
Right.
And it just took off, and it worked. I think a lot of it was our readers really wanted the content we were giving them, and they started sharing it with their sisters and roommates and moms. And all of a sudden, our local publication was read in all 50 states and 10 other countries. So we launched a national website, and we've just been trying to keep up ever since. It's a little bit like water skiing.
A lot like water skiing. So, Caitlin, you're a dynamic young city councilwoman. You have an enviable position, and then you give it up. Why'd you give it up, and what are you doing now?
Well, I gave it up because I love my day job, and it was just a matter of time before the two were sort of in conflict, and it was really important to me to give my 100% of my energy to my work as a public affairs and communications consultant. I think in terms of your pie question, going back to that, I really like a mixed berry pie or a chicken pot pie because I think our pie in Missoula needs to have more ingredients in it. And so one of the things that I was very passionate about on city council, which is partly how I got to know these two well, is getting people who don't normally talk to each other and to actually start to care about city government, because I think too often it sort of draws the usual suspects.
So it's Missoula pot pie.
Yes.
Missoula pot pie. And Elke, why Spectrum so interesting for people to know about?
Not
Elke. Holly.
Why is Spectrum so interesting
Yes.
to know
Yeah,
about?
right.
Well, because we're in the business of creating change. We are out every day inspiring the next generation of Montanans, particularly in rural tribal settings, to think about science, technology, engineering, and math, as well as higher education as a place for them.
And how's that going?
It's going quite well. We've grown so in 2007, we opened our doors really with a small pot of money from the National Science Foundation, a little bit of an incubated space on campus, and worked with about 12,000 people over the course of the year. This past year, we worked with 52,000 people in Montana.
That's great.
I know, we put some serious miles on our U-Haul dragging exhibits across.
Wow.
And then we have a beautiful space downtown, which saw about 27,000 people. And I think also what I would say is that we started with a breadth model of really thinking about how do we cover this whole state, and now we have a depth model where we have these deep partnerships in some of our tribal settings and some of our rural settings, and then here in Missoula, where if we need a coalition of people to make some change, they're ready to help.
So you created a network.
We have a great network.
A feeder network. So how many different outposts do you have around the state?
That's a great question. So we have pop-up museums right now at the Missoula Public Library. We have a pop-up museum at the Missoula Airport, which you've maybe seen.
I have.
In the summers, we have a pop-up in the Bitterroot. And then on the Flathead Reservation, we have a partnership called Nation, which is our tribal advisory group. And we have, I would say, almost monthly programming that's happening on the Flathead Reservation. As far as the breadth goes, we work with about half the state or the counties in the state, as well as every reservation.
So beside that, you're also the co-PI of the Big Sky Brain Project?
You've done your research.
What's that about? I like the idea, Big Sky Brain Project.
I know.
The big brain in the big sky.
Yes. No, we have a colossal brain, too. It's a mega brain that travels, bigger than this room. Which
That's not
isn't
saying
that big.
much, really.
Yeah, we're all squeezed
We're
in here like
schwitzing in here right
sardines.
now.
So it's a partnership with Dr. Mike Kavanaugh, who is the director of the Center for Structural and Functional Neuroscience. And it's really looking at, and it's kind of a bold idea. We're one of 8 museums in the nation that has one of these partnerships. But how do we bring the research that's happening in real labs to the floor of a museum so that children can roll up their sleeves, try it on, and begin to imagine either following that as a pathway or being more informed as a citizen about their brain.
So I want to use you as consultants, all three of you. I would need information about what's happening with women in the work world in general. I want to go from the macro down to Montana.
Caitlin is stepping up to the mic.
So there's only 7 countries in the world where women take as active part in the business world as men do. And even though there's 126 million women operating new businesses and 98 million women who are in established business leadership positions, that's a small percentage, right?
I bet it's a growing percentage.
It's growing. And women entrepreneurs are the fastest growing segment of the entrepreneurial market. They're growing at 1.5 times the rate of men. What's happening in Montana?
Well, I think the growth of women entrepreneurs in Montana can be somewhat traced back to the wage gap that we have in Montana and even here in Missoula, because there ain't no wage gap when you're the boss. So,
Nice.
Yeah, you don't
you're
get
the boss.
when you're the boss, you don't get paid, so you don't have a problem.
Well, I don't know. I mean, at
But you
least the
said it
dream is
right.
there that eventually you do get paid, right? And I think that we've had so many strong women from Montana or who are of Montana. I think of like Lisa Stone from Blog Her, who's been a great mentor to Elke, who have really just taken the bull by the horns and made it work here, because we all want to live and stay in the state, and it can be an elusive thing if you also want to make a decent living to support your family.
Well, Elke, what's it like running a company? Let's talk about practical issues.
Well, I think I also have a family, so there's the juggle there. And sometimes entrepreneurship is great when you have a family, because you there's the facade that you get to set your own schedule, which really just means you work all of the time except for during your kids' Christmas show. But so you can juggle and you can balance in a little bit different way because you are the boss, but everything costs something. Everything costs some of your energy or some of your attention, and it's hard to find the ways to keep those parts of your life dependent on each other and separate.
Well, you also have a husband that probably wants some of your time
too.
as well. Yeah, him.
And she's got 2 young boys, so she's got her hands full.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of it comes, my business has grown as my kids have.
Mm-hmm.
My kids have grown up knowing that I run a business, and they know that there's multiple priorities going on. I have a few little things I do. One is I have a rule where it sounds kind of harsh, but it's really not, where I don't apologize. Really ever, unless
I'm sorry to hear that.
You just apologized.
I bet you are,
The
Scott
first thing that
Richmond.
came out of your mouth,
Keep
Scott.
on throwing them at me.
No, like if I miss something, one of my kids' things, or if I miss something at work, I don't apologize to either one. If I miss something of my kids, if I start apologizing, then I'm taking whatever their experience was and I'm making it all about me.
Right.
Instead, I try and say, tell me all about your show. And I try not to insert how much I wish I had been there into their experience. And I apply the same thing at work, too. If I miss something at work because of my family, I say, thanks for your patience.
How many folks do you employ now? Because I'm familiar with the company.
Yeah. So we have a team of 6 that are employed with us, but we've worked with over 800 writers now on a freelance level. We've got, 2,500 stories plus on our website. We're working on our 23rd print issue. So
Fantastic.
Lots of people.
Very successful, and it's hard to build a media brand.
That's for sure.
And she's done
As you
it well.
can tell from this radio station.
Exactly. Hello.
Hello. Anybody out there?
Well, the beauty of
Is this on? Is this on?
It's the Wild West right now, but the beauty of it is nobody knows what they were doing. Mama Load was actually just recently in Forbes as an example of a niche competing with an industry giant. And a lot of it was that, if if media wasn't in such turmoil right now, a small company like mine would have a much harder time cutting through. There's just a lot bigger cracks.
Well, it's in turmoil because there's so many changes that are taking place, and the traditional outlets are scrambling
fragmented.
to figure out. Well, they're scrambling to figure out what their future looks like.
Well, this is true.
Let me grab Holly back in here
Yes.
for a second. Holly, you mentioned the reservations and Native American community. What's happening with women in the Native American community? Do they have access to entrepreneurship and business leadership resources and support?
That's a fabulous question, and I wish that I had a good answer for you, and I don't, but I'm going to bring it to Sci Nation, our tribal advisory group, and I'm going to ask them that question.
Well, that's important to know because, it's one of the groups that most of the things that we're talking about, lower wages and access to upward mobility, is really limited in the Native American community.
No, it's so true. And I think what I would say that I know a lot about is that there is a real thrust and focus on getting Native women and girls inspired about science, technology, engineering, and math, which in many ways is a backbone to some great entrepreneurship.
Caitlin, I got a question for you.
Oh, can I add a couple?
Okay,
Let her add.
Okay.
So I just wanted to add a couple of things. So one, we know that the wage gap in Montana, and this is when you account for women who are in the exact same field, STEM field, as a man would be, is actually 74 cents on the dollar, and that's lower than the national average. And when you look at women of color, specifically Native women in our state, it drops to more like 52, 53 cents on the dollar, which is really just shameful. And as Holly mentioned, and a lot of her work is devoted to really inspiring kids, including girls, to get excited about STEM careers because those can offer often higher paying jobs that can lift you out of poverty. But if you imagine a reservation community, it can sometimes be really tough to have the basic access to science and technology or even broadband at home that you need to be able to take advantage fully of those programs. So.
You're listening to What Do You Know on KGVO. Our guests today are Caitlin Copple from Hilltop Solutions, Elke Govertsen from Mama Load, and Holly Truit from Spectrum.
So, obviously, entrepreneurship is a vehicle for upward mobility, and women are taking a much more aggressive pathway into entrepreneurship. Is Montana a good place for entrepreneurship for women?
Someone step up to the mic, Elke.
You
can be honest.
Yeah, no, I think everywhere you go has its ups and downs. I think that Montana, for us at Mama Load, has been an advantage. I don't think we could have. Well, first of all, we started Mama Load with $400, and you just can't do that in New York City.
Not unless you have a Shylock.
You actually really barely can do it in Montana. I don't recommend starting quite that skinny. But, I think for us going out into the world, there's been a lot of opportunities for us. People will pick up our calls because there's a 406 number, and they're like, well, that's different. We're inherently branded as authentic, which is, I think, kind of part of what makes media gold anymore is if it's authentic, and because we have the Montana stamp, that helps.
Right.
We've had great access to mentors. I know that funding is often cited as an issue in Montana. I think funding is one of those things that you can get and you cannot get anywhere you're at. So I tend to not really subscribe to the obstacles, but I'm also one who kind of likes obstacles to sort of shoot them down.
New Hampshire's the best state in the country for entrepreneurship.
Is that right?
Yeah. What? And I'm not asking you to know about New Hampshire, but in general, for anybody, what can Montana do to make make things better for entrepreneurs? What do we need to be doing? Caitlin, you're the governor now of Montana. What do you do? What are the three things you do?
God, help us all.
What are the 2 or 3 things?
Well, I mean, I think it is worth noting that Montana is in the top 5 or top 3 in terms of entrepreneurial activity and startups by the Kauffman Foundation. So I didn't realize New Hampshire is number 1. But, with a motto like live free or die, I mean, what are you supposed to do?
A lot of pressure on you.
We love freedom, too.
But we're partially on the top of the list because we don't have any other choices. We don't have a lot of corporate leaders, big corporations in the state.
Yes.
They're not. You have to create your own jobs to stay here.
Yeah.
So that's part
I
of the reason.
think the best thing that Montana can do is leverage its network of expats, right? Because there's a lot of people from Montana who weren't able to stay here or chose not to stay here for whatever reason. And I'm becoming part of this camp by moving back to Boise in terms of my home base, but who care deeply about this state and would bring their networks to bear and just their thinking as advisors or whatever to help a startup,
Right.
leverage the resources and relationships they need to get ahead. I'm definitely in Elke's camp, having just assisted a local startup Upstream Research in their $1.6 million raise. I think if you have a problem that you're providing a real solution to, that the money will follow.
Sure.
And I think part of the problem in Montana is we often don't think big enough, and we don't think outside of our borders.
Is this Montana, or is this Missoula, Montana? When you're saying Montana, does the same issues exist in Bozeman and Billings? Or is there a different philosophy, let's say, there than there is here?
My experience is that Bozeman is definitely the leader in terms of reaching out, having a more outward focus. I think Missoula, just like perhaps our topography, we're a bit more myopic sometimes, for better or worse.
How about Billings?
Billings is its own beast, right? And I think they have the most economic activity in the state, the most people in the state. And it's just I think it's a different beast altogether. There's definitely a growing entrepreneurial climate there, and growing tech kind of space there, but definitely Missoula and Bozeman seem to be the leaders in terms of scalable tech companies.
So Holly, university's doing things in entrepreneurship, and they're doing things in incubator work. So what do you see coming out of there that you would like to highlight?
Ooh, I would love to answer that question. I do want to piggyback if I can.
Go right ahead. We're free for all here.
Because I feel like I definitely am much more of a social entrepreneur, and I would say that the funding opportunities in Montana or from the federal government in relationship to Montana are profound. And I think Caitlin hit the nail on the head when she talked about, are you doing nice work or are you doing necessary work? And if you're doing necessary work that's around social change, particularly involving rural tribal communities, I think the money's there. But to your question about UM and what's the exciting things that are happening in higher education in relationship to that intersection of research and development and entrepreneurship, I was just reading a great article that was written interview with the head of, it's the MIT, the dean for entrepreneurship and innovation at MIT, and he was saying that he thinks the next big ideas, and I would say historically this is the case, will come not from the private sector but from the public sector when it plugs in with private companies. And I think UM is doing some really great work with that. I think it would be great for you guys to get Joe Fange in here to talk about the work that he's doing, but
well, it always emerges at different junctures in history of business. The public-private, nexus has really been the launching place for so many, great innovations. From technology to science to medical innovations have all come from that nexus. And we sometimes try to, isolate the two. It's business versus, the public, or it's business. University is something different. And the fact that we can mix this all together. Makes it better. Yeah, you put everything in the blender, you get a better mix out of it all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think that's where the remarkable things happen. And I think what we need as an institution and higher education needs in general is, again, that idea of moving from nice to necessary. And I think the private sector and communities are profound at being able to help the university, who can generally solve, right? Higher education can solve any problem that it bird dogs if it works on it long enough. But we need to know what the right problems are to be bird dogging. And I think UM has got some great ears, and I think we're building infrastructure to do even better work with that.
Elke, Mama Load, are there things happening outside the United States that are of interest to American parents that they should be learning from other places? I mean, we're not always the thought leaders and of the world. Are there things that are happening other places that should be applied here?
Well, paid paternity and maternity leave is an embarrassing issue for us to talk about.
Absolutely, it's a shocking issue,
it's shocking and it's shameful, and it sets us up to struggle as families, which in the end of it sort of sets us up to fail as adults.
Right.
Right.
And so I think that's a huge one that we could be looking elsewhere for. I also think that there's a judging and competitiveness that is highly unnecessary, both just as a parent or as a woman, but also as a business person. That I think there's some sort of weird scarcity mentality that makes everyone want to scrap each other for,
Yeah.
When I think other cultures and other communities exercise a little more abundance mentality and a little more support.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you go to China and other places,
Yeah.
particularly where they're getting greater resources, they're lavishing in many ways on their children and on their families in a way that you haven't seen here for a while.
Yeah, and I think that I think this is changing, but I think our independent streak is not always helpful. Again, both as a parent and as an entrepreneur, my mom lives with us, and that's been entirely a huge factor as to why both my husband and I have been able to start our own businesses. So I think that going back to a village and multi-generational living situations actually opens up huge economic, social, emotional opportunities.
Like Denmark.
Yeah, well, this whole thing about American exceptionalism, which we've chatted about other times. I mean, that sometimes blinds us to being open and accepting of things that work in other places without labeling them. I mean, when you mention paternity and maternity, I can hear people talk about socialism. It's not socialism. It's good human relations, and it's good, it's good growth potential activity as opposed to, labeling it in some political vein.
Yeah, I think that we've kind of gotten into this place where everything is so extreme that no one can really take a sort of point of view that's just moderate and reasonable, and everything has to be, wildly yes or no, as opposed to, well, sometimes.
Well, you get thrown into a category. You mentioned something like that, and you get all of a sudden lumped into an area or another area. Caitlin, Hilltop Solutions, what are you guys working on?
Hilltop Public Solutions.
Hilltop Public Solutions is a firm based in D.C. with offices all around the country. I'm part of the Montana-Idaho office, which has just been great. And we play a large role in directing kind of the conservation practice of Hilltop. So we get to work a lot on issues like protecting our access to America's public lands and things like that.
So have there been some victories lately that you're proud of?
Well, I actually got to go and talk to Ammon Bundy.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Finicum prior to his death. So that was like the highlight of my year, which happened I think it was January 4th or something.
Wow.
We got there. So that was hard to top.
So what was that like? What was that like?
It was amazing. I mean, it was so we roll up, and I'm with my two colleagues. I actually wrote about this in the Independent, so if you want to see the longer version, you can go there. But we roll up kind of expecting some sort of FBI checkpoint, right? But there's nothing. I mean, it's just sagebrush. It's Burns, Oregon, which is, not too far from the Boise area where I'm from. Right. And, there's cable TV trucks from everywhere from, at that point,
sure
it was
they weren't
mostly
installing
CNN
cable TV?
And there's even a drone from HBO flying around, which I was convinced the guys in the lookout tower who were armed and had it out the window. We were going to definitely shoot down the drone, but they didn't. And we were, able to blend in and ask questions at the press conference and interview some militants, most of whom are now in jail.
Right. So. Right.
That's an example of the stuff I get to do.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Balls, like Elke's shirt.
Well, you all are. I mean,
so who brought everybody together? How do you guys all know each other? Let's talk about that, because networking is crucial.
Is the networker here, right? The networm is.
She's stepping away from the mic, Caitlin.
Well, Elke and I know each other because we used to teach Pilates together. Isn't that hilarious?
So long ago.
Very helpful.
Long ago,
Back
so
when we used
far
to exercise.
And I don't know. We've just all kind of gotten to know each other. I think we have similar interests, and I, of course, know Arnie and like Arnie, and Scott's not so bad either, although I haven't seen as much of you lately. And I just thought it would be an interesting conversation. I'm always interested in seeing Missoula take a more of an interest in economic development and creating good paying, sustainable jobs in our community.
What do you do? So tell us what you're going to do down in Boise. So you're moving to Boise.
Same thing, yo.
Same thing, but...
Try to turn Idaho purple like Montana.
Just start planting more purple potatoes and that'll do it. Hey, Holly, what did you do before you were with Spectrum and at the university?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've basically been at the university either studying or working since I moved here in 1994.
From where?
From the coast of Maine, which is a great place to live.
Yes, it is.
But before I directed Spectrum, I had the treat of working on another National Science Foundation project, which was looking at how do we expand the diversity of our research students that are coming to UM. And so I had the treat of flying down to Puerto Rico, to Chicago and San Francisco, and recruiting some awesome kids to come and do research.
Tell us a little bit about some of the kids that you're working with. Like, what's the future look like in terms of our student base or interns, Elke, that you might have, or Caitlin, folks that you've brought into the fold?
I would say our future in Montana is incredibly bright. We have super curious kids that are excited about STEM. I think that in many ways, when I began, and I have a background in public health, so I think a lot about the change we're creating in a behavioral change model. In the beginning, it felt like it was just sort of getting it on kids' radar, trying to get that spark. Now it's about scaffolding. Like, how do we grow with them? If we're going to be in a town for a short duration of time, how do we build the infrastructure so they can continue that enthusiasm? And I think that is a very promising thing for Montana.
Is there this myth of the millennials, like they don't want to work, they think everything should be given to them, or can we debunk that? Because I can certainly look at a bunch of kids that have worked here that are anything but, looking for a handout. They are, entrepreneurial, hard workers, self-starters.
We have, Spectrum employs, we have about 35 college educators. They're all fabulous. I just saw an article in my Facebook feed. It was either Inc. magazine or Harvard Business Review that said the same thing. If you're paying money to understand what millennials want, you're wasting your money because they're the same as everybody else.
Exactly.
Right. You give money.
Elke, what are your thoughts?
I would actually say that maybe millennials are potentially the best of us. I think that there's a really profound and important shift in placing importance on social good and social impact, as well as that they want to be doing something that matters. And I think that that's a really good swing for our culture, is to have people who are willing to care about what they're doing and hope that it changes their community or their world in a positive way. And I think that as a generalization is a really positive one for the millennials right now. We work with a ton of interns, both from the business school and the journalism school. Usually in the summertime, actually, we'll often double our staff with just interns. And they're great. They're really smart. We have a very self-directed business. And I think most people will give you what you expect. So if you expect a lot, you'll get a lot.
So is your assessment of that the reason why millennials love Bernie Sanders?
I think that everyone on all, how many sides are there right now? 4 or 5, something ridiculous. I think everyone's wanting change, wanting something different.
Yeah, but
to be.
But every campaign is that way. I mean,
Totally.
Obama campaign was about change. John Kennedy campaign was about change.
They all
Bill
are.
Clinton was about change.
The
change
Trump campaign is about change. I mean, it's like everyone's wanting change, and so I think that
change is the false currency of political, pandering.
Yeah,
I am curious to know. So the majors, like, what are some of the areas of study of a lot of your interns?
We get kids from the business school, and we get a lot from the journalism school, and that's actually been a really great draw for us because they're really well-rounded. And I think that the journalism students recognize that doing an internship with us, they're not going to get fed into just a specific silo.
Right.
And I think that's a big shift in media and journalism in general. And I think the school is shifting that way as well. But they get a real entrepreneurial internship.
And
they get
film and media arts too, right?
Yep, we get some of those. It's really I think what is the draw is that they really get in behind the curtain. We sit at the table and talk about how are we going to make this work, and we're trying all these different things. They're definitely seeing how to make something out of nothing, and I think that that's a huge thing. And then you apply the journalism skills there, and it's really been really great. And they have a requirement. They have a huge internship requirement. So for us, that's nice because we have a certain number of hours we can count on too.
So what do we need to do, Caitlin, Holly, Elke, to keep millennials in our region, in our state, and not leaving to go other places? What other attractions or incentives do we need to be offering here?
Can I plug something?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. You can plug anything you want.
So on the 29th of this month, actually, Mama is hosting one of our small business lecture series. It's called the Learn As You Go lecture series. And we're bringing up a woman from Phoenix named Courtney Klein to talk about social good and how to build social good components into your business and why that's good for not only your community but also your bottom line. Mm-hmm. She has an incubator down there that is for social good businesses, for profit and nonprofit. And so I think being able to take businesses pre-existing and future ones in Missoula and be thinking about them that way. You know, I think we don't want to lose kids because of wages, but we also don't want to lose kids because of meaning. And
Right.
so I think that's an important piece.
Because there's a lot of seductive places to live around the rest of the world. I know we like to call Montana the last best place, but the dirty little secret is there's some other nice places too in America, you know, and some of them have a little bit more incentives than we have here. Let me ask you something in a bigger sense. Do women still need to have women's entrepreneurship activities and women's foundations and women's support organizations, or is that time, you know, rapidly coming to an end?
I think this is Elke, and I think we're on the cusp of it. Like, I think that there's aspects of that are still needed because there are some inarguable things like the wage gap,
Right.
that still need to be really specifically advocated for.
Right.
And there also needs to be the opportunity to just be an entrepreneur. And, like, it drives me crazy to be only, you know, you go to a big event and they put you on the women's panel and it's like, oh, man,
Right.
you know, like, put me on the panel. You know, like,
Right. I mean,
it's,
well,
you
part
know,
of the whole thing is if you want to talk about the wage gap, don't you need to be talking to some men about it rather than just women talking to women?
yeah, and I do think it goes both ways. And Caitlin's heard me talk a million times at women's events about I'm the mother of sons, and I also want them to be part of that discussion and part of that solution, and I also want them to have opportunities.
Right.
I don't that if we start just continually siloing by gender.
Yeah. I mean, look what happens in
It doesn't
look what happens in the
work in the
political
world.
process. All the repressive legislation against women or by old white men sit around talk to each other about women's issues.
Let's talk. Well, let's.
I mean that's and you're all involved in women's health issues and those sorts of things. That's wrong.
I mean, I think there's certain undeniable like socioeconomic facts, right? That
Right.
show that women are different in some ways. Like, for example,
Well,
women
they're
have
smarter,
to be-
they're more calculating.
Well, thank you. But women have to be asked 12 times before they'll run for office.
Yes.
Maybe that's because they're smarter, right?
That's right.
Going back to
part-
that.
that's
But
part of the
it's,
reason.
You know, and the same is true when you look at the patterns of women and men and what jobs they apply for. Women won't even apply for a job unless they meet 100% of the qualifications. Men, if they meet, I forget, is it like 40 or 50%? I feel like it's less than 50%. They'll
Well,
apply.
women are less prone to overconfidence. Men say, "Well, I can do that." You know, I mean, it's
Yeah, and even just, raising your hand. And at what point do we start to see, like, I'm sure Holly knows all of this, but, where interest in STEM fields goes down around junior high or whatever it is. So I think it's a combination of all of that. But I agree 100% that we can't do it without men. I mean, I think people like both of you have been super helpful to me in terms of, helping me network or know people that I should know, whether
Right.
that's here or nationally. And the Women's Foundation, which I'm a board member of, not for much longer because I'm leaving. But we're actually inviting men onto our board because we recognize that it has to be kind of the same
Sure.
table. And while it's good to recognize the unique needs and kind of space that women occupy, that you can't
Well, you
do
have
it
to
alone.
you have
and
to have an
should-
effect on men. I mean, I learned it a long
Yeah.
time ago in the career that I've had. But when you mentioned that, and I appreciate that. But when I thought about not helping you, but networking with you, I never thought of Caitlin as a woman. I just thought of you as a professional person that was smart and good, and I liked you, and I wanted to see you meet some other people that I thought would fit together with you. Never thought of it in that other way. And you have to, I think, work with men in a way that sensitizes them to the fact that they shouldn't make those prejudgments. Well, I'm going to help her because she's a woman,
She
or
has
because
cute red boots on.
she has, yeah. Look how, and she smells good, and look how nice. I mean, that kind of stuff is.
She showers.
Yeah, she showers. I'm so talking.
And I just want to make a quick plug for
Right.
Jackie Moore. She's a professor
Sure.
at the University of
Yeah.
Montana, and she's just started this kind of grassroots thing that has grown like crazy. Western women who get this done.
Right.
And it is just for women only, but she's often bringing university students to meet women in the community. And I know if women are like from out of town, they'll come, et cetera. And I think that that's been great in terms of countering what's known as the good old boys club, which I don't think
Right.
necessarily is set up to be this super negative thing, like to keep keep the women out. I think it's somewhat natural that people congregate to hang out with people who have their similar interests.
No, some of it is to keep the women out because they feel more comfortable saying what they want to say without women around.
Too. But I do think, it's important to have shared tables and, for Elke to be on the panel and not just the women's panel.
Right.
But I do think that it's been really helpful to have those communities where it is just women, at least for me.
Elke, I want to ask you about Mama Load. How did you figure out how to get all this content for free?
I don't. I pay for it.
You pay for it now?
I think that's why we have good content.
Okay.
The Huffington Post doesn't pay for most of their content.
Right.
And so in my model that they talked about in Forbes was that we were watching what the big guys were doing and we just did the opposite.
Right.
Because they were flailing. One of the decisions from the very beginning when these paychecks were coming out of my personal checking account was to pay for the writers and pay the photographers. We keep talking about STEM, and I just have to push on that a little bit. I'm actually kind of more of a STEAM girl. Right. I think that, and that's something to answer one of your other questions about Missoula, is I think investing back into our education system for the arts. If we aren't doing that, we aren't going to have entrepreneurs because all the skill sets in the world without being creative, we're screwed.
That brings up a great point, which when you compare the universities between here and Missoula, Montana State, is it a value? People kind of like downgrade getting a liberal arts education where, in fact, it really should be the exact opposite. Like the liberal arts majors are the ones that actually bring new ideas, new thinking, and kind of an expansive view of the world.
Well, you have to have an eclectic background. I mean, look at all three of you. Are you doing what you went to school for?
No.
None of you are.
But what was your major in college?
I have a master's in journalism.
Right. I was a journalism major.
I have a master's in environmental sciences, but most of my work was in public health policy and communication.
Right. So the point is that, this is a place that actually brings new thinking and new ideas. I am curious, do you spend time going to like the high schools and the secondary schools in Missoula to kind of to tell your story, each of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just finished a 3-part workshop over at the high school and middle school in Big Sky, Montana.
Great.
Talking about writing and storytelling and mentorship models around that. And I think that it's one of those things where if we aren't telling our stories of how we're doing it here, kids aren't even going to know that it's possible.
And this is the
here.
opportunity to get it as part of their thinking now before they're fully formed.
Well, it's role modeling,
Yeah.
and mentoring.
Before they're
Well,
fully
and,
formed
I mean-
and they know what they want to do, you're giving them ideas.
Well, and they give me ideas too. I mean,
Right.
mentorship's always a pretty if you're doing it right, I think it's pretty 360.
Sure.
And I think that as far as like the liberal arts question, I was just at an event in Silicon Valley and the head of HR for Google was one of the panelists, and somebody asked, "Hey, I have a kid going to college. What should I tell him to study?" And everyone's waiting for this person to say like engineering,
right.
STEM, all that stuff, and the head of HR at Google was like liberal arts.
Sure.
Good.
Yeah, makes sense.
Pendulum swings back.
Without even missing a beat. And I also think the whole Bozeman, Missoula thing, like that's all this great conversation while we're here, but it's just sort of like, it's sort of a silly little distraction from the fact that, if you're in LA or New York City, they don't really have a huge distinction between Bozeman and Missoula.
No.
You're Montana. And so I think for all of us to really kind of get off the competing in Montana, again, it's that scarcity mentality that it's like, Montana doing better is going to be better for all of us.
That's right. The fact that we have both is wonderful.
Especially when it comes to the
200-mile
funding.
range of each other.
Yeah, when it comes to getting funded as a business, when it comes to being able to travel, because travel is a huge thing as a bootstrapped business. Trying to get in and out of Montana is crazy, and I've scrapped on every grant and opportunity I possibly could and piggybacked a million. I mean, I can make $400 go
pretty far.
10,000 miles.
So where do you see Mama Load 3-4 years from now?
Global domination.
Global domination.
Yeah.
Hello, Ted Cruz. Hey, let's do a quick ID, Arnie.
Okay, sure.
You're listening to What Do You Know on KGVO. Our guests today are Caitlin Copple, Hilltop Public Solutions, Elke Govertsen, Mama Load, and Holly Truit, Spectrum.
So multiple countries, multiple languages, parents around the world turning to you for help and guidance and leadership.
It's actually, we don't do much guidance. We do a lot of understanding. But I think that Mama Load has grown to the point organically right now where we've really built we've built a huge library and arsenal of kind of the gold, and there's a lot of machines out there looking for the gold and trying to figure out how to get it. And so for us right now, I think we're looking for scale partners and opportunities to, whether it's licensing or acquisition, to put our killer content into
so what's
machines that already have
what's
the distribution.
missing? What's missing to make that happen?
I don't think that from here. I mean, I think we could, but it's not what I want to do.
Right.
And I think continually making sure that you're not working your butt off to build the life you don't want. You know, I don't want to build the distribution. I mean, we have a huge national audience for the distribution model we have, but I think for us, plugging in what we have into some pre-existing distribution model, whether that's another media company or a large brand looking for content marketing, what we have is our audience trusts us and they feel like we understand them, and that's a huge missing component, especially in the parenting space out there.
Holly.
Could not agree more.
So what's the next step for Spectrum? Where does it go from here?
Question. So I think one of the most exciting things that's happened for Spectrum is the launch of the Broader Impacts Group. And so we're part of that, and I have the pleasure of directing it. And it really is about creating a family of organizations with similar purpose but different focus. So it's exciting. And I think it gets to the STEAM model in that we're beginning to, not only is it the research component, but the creative scholarship, and audiences are broadening. Like last week we had Innovate UM that happened that was a focus on research, change making, innovators who are alumni, collaborators, and also faculty, but geared towards an adult audience. And that's something that just hasn't been in Spectrum.
So if that works, let's say if that all fits together, meshes and works, how do we know it? What's the output of all that?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I think it would be two-part, right? Like that idea that UM needs to have big ears and know what its community needs, know what its private sector needs. I think these types of programming that Big is setting out to do and beginning to do, and Spectrum has been doing, is part of that. I think another piece of it that you would see as an output is that people would feel engaged with the research and the creative scholarship, inspired by the university, seeing it as a place for them to study, but also seeing it as an incredible investment.
So are you conjuring this all up out of your own consciousness, or is there a model somewhere that you're pulling this from?
That's a good question. So I'm a borrower. I know, I like this. I'm a borrower. So Stanford and Berkeley have a little bit of a similar model. Theirs is much more on the back end, so trying to support faculty and having the competitive proposals they need to get them funded, because broader impacts are so critical. We have that organizational goal, but I would say that we're very much focused on the change piece for the state.
Caitlin, good, thank you. Caitlin, so I want city council. You're no longer a city council member, and you alluded earlier on. I wanted to get back to it, to a day job versus working on the council. Tell the audience a little bit about how much time it takes to be an elected official in a small community like Missoula, and what's the return on that investment of time and effort for you?
Well, it takes a lot of time. I was spending 30 plus hours a week.
And what's the compensation for a city council member?
It was about $12,000 when I was there. And, most city councils around Montana pay less than that or nothing at all.
Sure.
So in many ways, Missoula is progressive in how much it pays. However, my personal feeling is that having 12 of us is too many.
Sure.
There's lots bigger cities that are governed with a fewer number of people, and I think that would allow a different resource allocation, whether that was employing some independent staff that actually, reports to the council as opposed to the mayor, or would just allow us to reduce the number of city council people and make it a more full-time kind of livable wage.
Right, because it's on one end you could have citizen government without pay and you're just a volunteer. On the other end, you have full-time professional. Mm-hmm. The middle position is almost the worst of both worlds in some ways, because you make it you can't live on $12,000 a year.
Yeah, and so it's pretty hard to find
people
a diverse crop of people who have the flexibility in their jobs where they can take Wednesdays off essentially and sit in committee meetings, which is really where all the work happens. And I would argue it actually happens outside of even the committee meeting if you're doing your job.
Right.
And then, stay at these Monday night meetings where if it's something controversial, you could be there until midnight or 2 a.m. I don't think that's appealing to a lot of people. But, we have a women majority right now. We've got an all-women county commission, which is pretty exciting and new for Missoula. And, you know, I think it's great if people really feel like that's their calling. I mean, for me, I'm definitely a high urgency, like action-oriented person. And so the pace of government was really frustrating to me.
Well, also you have to make determinations and decisions about such an eclectic area of activities that you're not really prepared to,
you're not really going to be an expert in anything. I mean, maybe you can pick one thing, right? And so
but every day you're bombarded with, what do you do about the mercantile, and what do you do about the water problem, and what do you? I mean, there's just such diverse, issues.
Yeah, but I think, it was a great experience to me to run and to actually win, which I didn't really think I was going to actually win. But it turns out if you could raise money and knock a lot of doors, you end up winning.
Right.
So it was a very good experience, and I definitely don't regret doing it, but I think it's important to know like what your skill set is and where you can have the most influence. And for me, I am very happy with where I've landed.
And you're going down to Boise. How often are you going to come back to Missoula?
Once a month through July at least, and then at least quarterly. And it depends kind of who my clients are, but I'm definitely going to stay engaged here and try to keep up my personal and professional relationships here.
Good. So I want each of you to take a stab at this. For the men listening onto this show, give a piece of wisdom about women in entrepreneurship that you think that they ought to know. The show's name is What Do You Know? So you got a group of men here. You're out of the silo. Tell them something that they ought to pay attention to and they ought to know about and care about. Good. Holly.
I'll go for it. So I would say my husband is my wingman and very much a supporter. And I don't think that I could do the work that I do without him. And I travel a ton, sometimes with my son and sometimes without. But he is the secret ingredient. So I think for every strong entrepreneur you see, there is likely somebody who is stepping up every day to help you back.
A good support system.
Yes, it's critical. Yeah.
Makes sense. How about you, Elke? I know some of your support system.
Yeah, a lot of my support system, and I think that the support system, that is broader than just a men-women list of issues too. But so I would say that for the men out there, I think it would just be to. I very rarely feel like men are on purpose excluding. They just kind of don't even notice, when they start listing, their notable alumni, they just start listing people, and then all of a sudden, and so I think that there is just that base level of awareness of like, oh, hey, I'm not maybe listing women, or I'm not including women on this panel, or things like that. So I think just kind of having that checkpoint of diversity, and again, that I think again falls outside of just men and women, but just making sure that everyone's reaching outside of their normal, and their, there's like an anthropological term, it's like propinquity, which is that you like surround yourself with people who look like you and act like you, and to just sort of push past that. We already have so much non-diversity that we really need to like find our diversity where we can, whether it's age or gender or political influence or things like that.
Sure.
It is a difference, because you mentioned earlier about women's organizations. Maybe we should have some men on here because there's a reason to do it, right? And then sometimes men think, well, we should have women involved just because we don't have any. They don't think there's a reason to do it. They just say, well, there's none around here and we probably should. It's probably the right thing to do. I think women's organizations are thinking about involving men and bringing them in because there's a purpose to get to do that cross-cultural, training and education that's necessary.
Well, you have men on your staff, and you have writers that are men that are prominent
writers. Yeah, and I think it's kind of like what they're, there's all the conversation down in Silicon Valley right now of like, oh, we can't find women or things like that.
That's crazy.
It's so crazy. It's just so ridiculous. It's just that you're not looking,
right?
Outside of your locker room.
Yeah, it's just a convenient. It's just we can't find any because I haven't looked.
Yeah, and so I think that there is that. That opportunity, and I like I said too, though. I don't want to be on the women's panel just because I'm a woman, and I also don't want to be on the men's panel because I'm a woman. I want to be on the panel for
the people's panel.
What I've done, or who want to know what I know, or where I have something to offer. And so I think that just really continually, individually, all of us challenging our own subtle and not so subtle bias. I think is important.
Right. And for the last word, I think, Caitlin.
So another great resource is powerhousemt.org, and that's an initiative of the Women's Foundation, but men are encouraged to sign up, and it's sort of like a LinkedIn for Montana. And right now it's mostly women who
What's
have
the
profiles
address?
on there, powerhousemt.org.
Powerhouse.
So maybe we can throw that up on the website or something. Right. But we really encourage men to go there in order to find women who might be a good fit for a corporate board or a government board for that matter, or a nonprofit board, or really any position of leadership, or if they're hiring too, they can kind of learn about who's out there in Montana that they might not have been aware of. And I think I agree with everything Elke said, but I would just add that mentorship and looking at who you're mentoring and making sure that there are some women included in that group is huge, because I think that there's a lot of, just from the male friends that I have, it seems like the way that men get mentored in the workplace is very different from the experience that women have in the workplace.
Sure.
And I don't know why. And again, I don't think it's like
a whole
intentional,
other topic,
but
it's true.
Yeah. And I like to go golfing, so.
Right. I was just going to talk about golf.
Arnie can take me golfing anytime, and I learned in part because I thought it'd be kind of subversive, right?
Right.
Because not a lot of people like to golf.
I mean, there is the sexist undertones of business aren't going to change that easily. That's a perfect example that Caitlin just mentioned about in the business place. Men will say, well, let's take Bob out to play some golf, or let's take Bob, to the gentleman's club, or and then they have the woman where, well, let's take Caitlin shopping, let's take Caitlin, to
Caitlin for a steak.
Let's
take Elke golfing.
You haven't homogenized it enough to treat everyone the same, and the same being in a way that nurtures and grows and supports. It's very hard to break that undercurrent. I ran an organization one time in my career that had 400 staff, and there were only 6 men. And I was one of the 6 men, obviously. And I found that was actually, in reverse, one of the most sexist organizations I work with. The first day on the job, I was sitting at a conference at our sort of executive table, and one of the staff came over and was pouring me coffee as a woman, and I wouldn't let I hadn't stopped doing that. I said, "You're not pouring it for any of the other people on the table," and I vacuumed my own office, and it was shocking to the women that worked there. So, not that I was a trendsetter, but those things are very hard to break. Those patterns within organizations, and I think the 3 of you, are good examples of people that are breaking those trends and those stereotypes, and I commend you all for it.
And as a world traveler, forget about what goes on in other countries.
God,
I mean, then you're talking, that's a Pandora's box.
Well, and a lot of it's phony. I remember working in the former Soviet Union where we said almost all of our women are doctors in the Soviet Union.
Arnie, switching gears, last 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
A little insight into each of your personalities. Step to the mic. What book are you reading, or TV show are you binging on, or music are you digging that would help us understand who you are?
God.
And what do we know about you, Elke?
Oh, well, this actually is like I think I'm pretty outwardly nerdy anyway, but I'm actually reading this book right now called Endangered Words, and it's all about these awesome, killer vocabulary words and how they got their start and how they disappeared, and
What's the name of the book?
Endangered Words.
Okay.
That's kind of cool, right? It's like the mystery of words.
It's super, super fun and super nerdy, and I love it. I've been throwing them at my kids, and they're just like, "Oh, stop it!" All spring break.
Mom knows something, a lot of new things. Okay.
Yes, it's awful, but yeah. So I think that, yeah, I like just kind of continually learning. So I'm often reading a book that's something that nerdy.
Cool. How about you, Holly?
So I tend to sort of geek out on Harvard Business Review.
Oh my God!
I would say almost on a daily basis I've read an article, and today I actually brought one. Sometimes the best ideas come from outside your industry. So
you mean nobody's watching The Voice or anything like that? I mean,
Caitlin, come on.
There's got to be some.
Can Caitlin finish up? Bring up the right.
Well, in terms of TV, I love Scandal and I love House of Cards.
Okay, yes. Good. All right.
Did you finish season 4?
Yes, I did, and I had to turn away at the end. Oh my gosh, that was a lot.
Don't spoiler alert.
Yeah, and I also really like podcasts because I drive a lot,
Me
either
too.
to Billings or Boise, and I really like Stuff Mom Never Told You.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't heard of them, they're great, and I think they bring a millennial kind of feminist, but they might not, perspective to things. So it's very inclusive of men and wanting to be, friendly about the conversation. So I kind of like that.
Very cool. This has been a wonderful hour, Arnie.
It went very fast. You guys are terrific. We loved having you here.
Thank you. And come again, too, by the way. Our guests today were Caitlin Copple from Hilltop Public Solutions, Elke Govertsen from Mama-Load, and Holly Truit from Spectrum. We'll see you again next week.
Next week, Scott, we're talking about Scotch. Everything you wanted to know about Scotch with Charlie Brown.
Look out. All right, we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290, 1015 FM, and newstalkkgvo.com.